Okay.
Okay. I've sort of gone through the introduction prior to getting you online, and we're extremely thrilled that you've taken time out of your day to speak with us. And welcome to the Naples Mac Users Group here in Naples, Florida.
Great. Well, thank you. I I at some point we're going to switch to sharing my screen, so we might have to start a second recording when we do that, depending on how it goes. I don't know what
Okay.
I'll do.
Okay.
So you know who I am. I'm a senior writer for Macworld. I've also written a couple tech books. I wrote a book about iTunes Match, and I have another book about Mac Basics for Windows refugees, whom we try to welcome with open arms. I thought we'd start before we get into the crux of what I'm here to talk about, just to recap some of Apple's announcements from yesterday, um, in case you didn't follow along with the Macworld.com live blog. But the big unveils from yesterday, with Tim Cook in San Jose, California, were the new fourth generation iPad, which I think was one of the more surprising items. If you bought a third generation iPad 6 months ago, it's now one generation older. The fourth generation iPad isn't significantly different from the third gen, but it does have a faster processor, the A6X processor, and it's supposed to get about double the performance of the A5X processor and double the Wi-Fi performance as well. Obviously, the biggest unveil was the iPad Mini, which is a 7.9-inch miniature iPad. Jason Snell from Macworld, whom some of you may be familiar with, and Dan Morin got hands-on with it yesterday after the event. And they report that, it is an iPad. It's just smaller. It starts at $329, which I think is pricier than some of us were anticipating. But it is apparently very small and very light in hand. So if toting around your iPad or reading with it in bed or something has felt cumbersome, the iPad Mini might be a reasonable option.
It was funny.
Then the
It was funny you should mention that because the dog really got upset with me last night when I dropped the iPad on her head.
Yeah, my toes have been upset with me for approximately the same reason. The other big updates were on the Mac hardware line. So lest we fear that Apple has forgotten or is choosing to neglect the Mac, we don't have to worry about that. The most significant update, I guess, is either the new iMac, which is kind of comically thin and is extremely souped up and powerful internally, and then the 13-inch MacBook Pro with Retina display. I think Apple's back to maybe its widest laptop line that it's had in a while. Now there's three different models of 13-inch MacBooks you can get. There's a 13-inch MacBook Air, there's a 13-inch MacBook Pro with Retina display, and there's a 13-inch MacBook Pro without a Retina display. I have to imagine that at least one of those is going to go away at some point. I don't think Apple likes having so many laptops at the same size. I think the reason they kept the MacBook Pro hanging around right now, the one without the Retina display, is because the Retina display does add about $500 to the price of the laptop. And if you like the Mac Mini, that one got some internal updates too. It's got drive. Apple's not the first company to do this technology, but if history is a guide, they'll probably do it better than everybody else. The Fusion Drive is an option for the top of the line Mac Mini. It's an option in the iMac, and I'm sure it'll be an option across the Macintosh line by within the next 6 months or so. It's a drive that couples the benefits of a solid state drive with the benefits of a traditional hard drive. Those benefits are, pretty simply, solid state drives are much faster. They don't have any moving parts. It's basically the same as reading something in RAM. The computer can read it instantly, look at it, and work with it very, very quickly. So reads and writes those disks are very, very fast. The problem is solid state memory is much more expensive than traditional hard drive memory. So solid state drives are generally smaller. With this new Fusion drive, Apple couples a solid state drive with a more traditional hard drive and uses software to say the data that this user is accessing the most. If there's certain apps you use more or certain files you open a lot, we'll keep those and the crux of the operating system, Mountain Lion, on the solid state portion. The stuff that you access more infrequently, that you really are keeping for archival purposes, is what gets pushed over to the traditional hard drive. So you get all that storage, and anything that you're accessing regularly gets the benefits of the solid state drive's speed. Uh, I know that was obviously a very quick wrap up of yesterday's announcements. Are there any announcements from yesterday that you want more detail on, or to talk about a little bit more?
Yeah, we have some questions. Please speak up
Sure.
as loud as you can.
I think you said that the Mini is exactly a clone of functionality of the regular iPad.
That's correct.
Okay.
It is really the same as an iPad. Its internals are somewhere between that of an iPad 2 and the third generation iPad. But it runs all the same apps. Developers don't have to update their apps to work on the iPad Mini. It's the same apps, the same software. It's got the same ports on the outside. The one difference is that, like the fourth generation iPad, it now uses the Lightning connector instead of the old 30-pin dock connector. So it uses that new tinier connector that Apple introduced with the iPhone 5.
Okay, next question.
Yeah, on the iMac Fusion drive, I understood that to not be an option, that is going to be the drive that you choose. You can't choose a regular drive. And my question is, if you've got that drive, how are you going to use something like Super Duper to do a bootable backup?
It's a great question. So with on the first part of that, I'm just getting the web page in front of me on my other screen here. But with the new iMac, you do get, I believe, the option of whether you want to use that drive, because some people still want even more storage. So when you're custom building one of those iMacs to order, you can choose not to get the Fusion drive. In terms of backups, uh, we just got one in the lab at Macworld yesterday, and I haven't actually touched it myself. But the early impression is that it talks to other devices that would be less familiar with how it works under the hood, as if it were just a traditional hard drive. So something like SuperDuper would simply see it as one massive storage and wouldn't have any idea that some of it was stored in one kind of media and some of it was stored in another. So it would back up the complete set of data. When you restored your Mac, if you lost everything and started over from scratch with a Fusion drive, it wouldn't know which were the most used things and which weren't. But in theory, over the first few days of use, it would figure that stuff out again and repartition the data between the solid version and the regular drive.
But Lex, does it show up as one drive or two?
Yes, yes. To anything else looking at it, even to you as you look at your Mac itself, it's one drive. You don't have any. There is no user configurability, user-facing configurability over what data goes where. You just see it as one drive. So it's using technology / trickery to make it appear as if it's one cohesive universal drive.
One more related question, wasn't part of the announcement, but with the Thunderbolt cables, I've recently discovered and been told that you can do a bootable backup using a Thunderbolt cable, but the problem is that the control or the option, holding the option key down and turning the computer on, it will not show as a bootable drive. It'll show if you go into settings and set it as a bootable drive, but that doesn't do you any good if your system fails. Can you comment on that Thunderbolt problem?
Well, I can't. I don't know enough about it to say for sure. It was my understanding that you could boot from a Thunderbolt drive. I have one here, but I don't know that I've ever tried to boot from it. I thought that you could boot from it with exactly the option trick you mentioned. I know you can enter target disk mode the same way they used to be able to do with FireWire a few years back. And the technologies at play are actually kind of similar. But what I'll do is I'll talk to Dan Frakes, and I'll send an email to George once I get the answer. I'm making a note over here right now. And if I get information, I'll send it his way so he can pass it on.
Yeah, I have one. I have one of those Seagates that has the convertible back on it that converts it to a Thunderbolt. And when I did that, that's when I discovered this. And then I talked to one of the consultants we use in our group, and he said, yeah, that's a problem with using a Thunderbolt cable. So I'd be interested in knowing. I Googled it, and I was getting some conflicting answers.
All right, he'll get back to us with it. Yes.
What are the capacity options for the new Fusion drives? How big are they?
It's a great question. Let me get those in front of me real quick. So when they talk about the Fusion drives, the what's the right way to say it? Basically, it's the portion that's going to be the solid state version of the drive is static. I think those are all 128 gigs of flash storage. I'm just verifying that right now. One second. And then the regular storage can go up to 1 terabyte for the rest of the drive, which is kind of huge. I'm looking at them right now over here.
So the solid state version, you only get 128 gigabytes.
Well, yes, but that when we're talking about the Fusion drives,
Fusion.
it's combined.
Okay.
So all told, you get up to a terabyte of storage. I'm just trying to see. It looks like you can't actually. I think they're not actually accepting pre-orders yet, so I can't see all of the build-to-order options. Just checking one other place. Okay, so yeah, so the Fusion drive, they do still call it an option, and they're saying. Well, if you look at Apple's website afterwards, you can see on the iMac page they talk about the Fusion Drive performance, and they're saying that for things like an iPhoto import or for copying a 4 gigabyte file, it's about 3.5 times faster than a traditional hard drive, and for starting your Mac up, it goes about twice as fast, which I know isn't what you asked, but gave me a little more time. So you can go up to from 1 terabyte to 3 terabytes of storage. Those are the two Fusion Drive options. You can get 1 terabyte or 3 terabyte. You can even opt out of the Fusion Drive and get a traditional 3 terabyte hard drive, or you can do just a standalone 768 gigabytes of flash storage. Although I can't see the prices, but I promise you those will be very expensive. You won't be able to start configuring those until next month.
Thank you.
Any other questions as far as the new releases? Don, did you have a question? Or come on up.
No, I've heard that Apple is having quality control issues with the 27-inch display. Should we wait?
I didn't hear that one.
Apple is, I understand, having quality control issues with the 27-inch iMac. And should we wait until they get it settled?
You know, it's always a fair question, especially with new Apple Macs, particularly on the desktop side. I tend to try to wait out the first generation releases. It's certainly historically more first generation releases of Apple products have gone right than have gone wrong. I mean, if you look at the original iPhone and iPad, there were very few complaints about either one of those from production line issues. But if there are going to be any, this will be the time when there are. So if that's something that you've had a bad experience with in the past or just something you're nervous about, I can't see a strong argument against waiting the 6 months to 10 months to see if there are any issues. Maybe 6 months is probably enough to see if any issues crop up, unless you have a very urgent need to get a new iMac right away.
All I can say is for people like Mitch and myself, that's the reason we like to do business with Apple. I would probably not wait, knowing that Apple will take care of the issue if there is one. Don, did you have a question?
I think that's very true too.
Yeah, hi Lex. First, thank you for a wonderful magazine and website. I've been subscribing since before I bought my first Mac in 2006. You guys are great. And
Thank you, that's great.
any fan of Weird Al is a friend of mine. But my
I
question
appreciate
is, Apple seems to be going away from customizable, user configurable devices. Witness the MacBook Air, the Retina display MacBook Pro, and there was no announcement, no mention yesterday of people like me looking for a new Mac Pro. So, but I'm not like George. I don't do gaming. I don't do heavy video editing. So really, the Mac Mini would be fine for me if I could have 3 Thunderbolt connected drives, one for iTV, one for my Time Machine, and one for my super duper backup. Is that what I'm going to be forced to do, or do you think there's going to be another Mac Pro, which I would buy instead?
So a lot to unpack there. I pretty much agree with the basis of your argument, which is that Apple's moving towards less configurability. In fact, at this year's or next year's Macworld Expo at the end of January, beginning of February, I'm moderating a panel with John Gruber from Daring Fireball and Matthew Panzarino from the Next Web to talk about that, how Apple does seem in some ways to be not turning its back on, but moving away from the power user to try to make things simpler by also making them a little bit less configurable, a little bit less user accessible, modifiable. That said, I think it is a certainty that you'll see a new Mac Pro in 2013. Tim Cook has said so with attribution. So he has gone on the record as saying we're going to have a big Mac Pro announcement sometime in 2013. I don't know if that's December 2013 or March 2013 or what, but I do know that I do fully expect to see a new Mac Pro with the things that has been missing for far too long, like Thunderbolt and USB 3 and solid-state drive options. I'm sure it'll include the Fusion drive option. Come out sometime next year.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, let's, one more question.
Sure.
I own a first generation iPad, and so I was looking for the new iPad release to be my upgrade. But with the iPad Mini also released at the same time, would I have any difference in performance between a 32 gigabyte iPad Mini and a 32 gigabyte fourth generation iPad?
Yes. The iPad Mini, I think to keep the price down where it is at $329, uses an older processor, uses the A5 processor. The iPad 4th generation uses a brand new processor, the A6X. Now, from your original iPad to the iPad Mini, you'll still see a significant speed boost, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 2 to 3 times as fast at least as the original iPad you're using. And we have all, except for the brand new ones, we have all the iPads here, so I can see the speed difference between the first and second and third. If speed and performance is your top priority, then I would say, yeah, you do want to get the 4th generation because it's got a faster processor. We haven't seen it yet to be able to test it, but I'm quite confident it'll have more RAM as well. You know, the 3rd generation iPad uses a full gigabyte of RAM, I believe, and my expectation is that the iPad Mini, since it has less screen to drive, will use half that. So if you want peak performance, the 4th generation would be the way to go.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, that's it for the first section.
Great. So is it safe to assume for the audience that there's, that you have, it's not just Macs, but also iOS devices, iPads, and iPhones that are popular?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I wanted to talk a little bit about productivity and basically offloading my brain to my Mac and iOS devices, which I rely on because I have a lot to remember and my computers are better at remembering it than I am. Probably you're all familiar, at least to some degree, with Siri. Maybe you've used it on your 3rd generation iPad or your iPhone 4S or iPhone 5. Let's see if I can get this to show up.
The average age, Lex, in this room is probably 90, so you're pretty accurate.
Understood. Do you so now, what's the general consensus? Do you folks like Siri? Do you turn to Siri sometimes to get things done quicker on your devices, or no?
Yes. I love it.
That's great.
He hates it.
Somebody hates it, somebody loves it.
That's fair. I was very excited about it. I'm still excited about it, and I'm hopeful that we can show some cool things to do with Siri in terms of brain offloading. Let me see. I'm going to switch to sharing my screen with you in a minute, but I just want to see if I can get my iPad to show up on it first. See if this will work.
You use reflections?
Yeah. So let me see if I can ask you to share my screen.